Welcome back to the Infinite Podcast, everyone. It's me, your host, with my co-host Simon, ready to dig into some lively banter. So, Groundhog Day. It's quite an odd tradition when you think about it. Tracing this furry forecast fest back, it's got roots in Europe, with traditions like Candlemas. It's fascinating how when people moved to America, they swapped out a hedgehog for a groundhog. Seems like folks have always wanted a way to predict and control the future. Your thoughts, Simon?
Right? Imagine some guy just decided, hey, this hedgehog thing isn't cutting it. Let's level up to a groundhog. It's like someone trying to predict the weather with a magic 8-ball. And every culture has its own quirky rituals. Humans just love feeling like they've got the upper hand on Mother Nature. Newsflash, we don't.
You know, this reminds me of a camping trip I took as a kid. We'd try predicting the weather by looking at the sky. Clear night meant a sunny day. Red sky at night was a sailor's delight, you know? One trip, we banked on the clear night for a hike the next day. Next morning, a downpour that caught us off guard. It's just like Groundhog Day. Whether it's an old wives' tale or a groundhog popping out, Mother Nature has her own playbook.
Oh man, nature's always got that wild card up her sleeve. We're basically playing weather bingo with traditions like Groundhog Day. Sometimes you win, but often you're just soggy and surprised.
But Simon, we might be selling Groundhog Day short. While it's a roll of the dice for an accurate forecast, there's value in these traditions beyond weather prediction. They're cultural touchstones that bring communities together, fostering a sense of belonging and continuity. We're talking celebration, anticipation. It's a social glue, not Weather Channel competition. There's merit in that, don't you think?
Oh, please, Joe. The only glue is the folks glued to their TV screens thinking a rodent has meteorology skills. Seriously, it's fun in games, I get it. But let's not pretend Phil the Groundhog has an advanced degree in atmospheric sciences. If we want community, let's have a barbecue or something. At least that way, if it rains, we've got burgers.
True, the science isn't solid. It's more about the lasting legacy and the stories we pass down. Think about Groundhog Day as a bridge between past and present. It might have started with a hedgehog in Europe, but today, it's all American. Just shows how we adapt traditions to our narrative, adding layers, evolving from serious forecast to festive event. Connecting over a groundhog or a burger, we're keeping the story alive. So, moving on. What else strikes you about these quirky customs we can't seem to let go of?
Hold up. A hedgehog started this whole deal? You're telling me we took Europe's spiny little critter and swapped in a chunky groundhog for an all-American spin? That's like rebooting a classic movie. Sometimes it's better, but usually you wish they left the original alone. People love remixing stuff, huh? The past just can't stay put. It's always getting a makeover for the sequel.
Absolutely, Simon. It's one big cultural remix. But I've got to ask, what's your take on these makeovers? Is it about genuine improvement, or are we just slapping a new coat of paint on age-old customs for the heck of it?
Ha, Joe? Most of the time, it's like giving a bath to a cat. Nobody wants it, the cat least of all, but you end up doing it anyway because now and then you think the cat's stink is your problem. We just keep dunking traditions in new paint, hoping for that fresh custom smell.
Well, I'd argue those baths are sometimes necessary. Traditions like Groundhog Day get stale. You can't serve the same meal at every party and expect people to stay excited. Remixing keeps things fresh and relevant. It's evolution in action. Sure, sometimes the new coat of paint drips all over the floor, but when it works, it reinvigorates the whole house.
I hear you, Joe. Yeah, nobody's hyped to chow down on the same old meatloaf at every shindig. Gotta mix up the menu. Spruce up the old traditions. Could spark some new joy, right? It keeps things spicy, gives us a reason to keep coming back for another bite. Change is good, sometimes. But come on, let's not lose the plot under all that new paint.
Definitely, Simon. So how do we strike that balance between honoring the essence of a tradition and keeping it fresh for today's taste? Where's that line, in your opinion?
It's like using your grandma's secret recipe, Joe. You respect the original because, well, it's grandma's, but tweak it so it doesn't taste like the Great Depression. With Groundhog Day, we keep the groundhog and the shadow thing because that's core, but maybe at a festival, food trucks, live music. Honor the past, but also please, let's make sure it's a party and not a history lesson.
Man, you nailed it. It's about the experience. Get people together, get them talking and laughing. Groundhog Day or any festival should be a blast from the start, not just something we trudge through because of tradition. Add some flavor to it, literally with those food trucks. Make it something people actually look forward to every year. Keep the core, but let's not make it feel like stepping into a time machine without the fun parts.
Totally, Joe. If you're just going through the motions, it's as fun as watching paint dry. But yeah, you spice up Groundhog Day, rock bands, gourmet burgers, Instagrammable moments, and suddenly it's not your great-great-grandpa's tradition anymore. I wonder, though, what would the founding groundhog enthusiasts think about how we've jazzed it all up?
Speaking of jazzing things up, let's swing over to the scientific side of this tradition. Our buddy Phil, bless his heart, has been forecasting weather with his shadow show, and you've got to wonder about his track record. I mean, can we really match a furry forecaster against our weather apps and meteorologists? It's time for some Shadow Science 101. Why do we get such a kick out of this groundhog game when we've got satellites in space?
Joe. Phil's predictions are about as accurate as flipping a coin in a tornado. It's funny, we've got tech that can spot a raindrop from orbit, and yet here we are, eyes glued to a groundhog for weather wisdom. Maybe it's because people love the ritual. We're wired for stories, drama, not cold hard data. But truth be told, that shadow science is basically just a fur-covered lottery.
Oh, don't get me started on relying on shadow plays over satellite feeds. Phil's predictions, let's be real, they hold about as much weight as my left sneaker, but it gets the people going. There's no denying there's something captivating about the pomp and pageantry that high-tech gadgets just can't deliver. And sure, flipping a coin might give you the same odds, but it's not nearly as fun as a top hat-wearing crowd waiting on a woodchuck's whim. But do you think we secretly love knowing we're rolling the dice with Phil's forecast?
Oh, without a doubt, Joe. We're all in for Lady Luck when it's wrapped up in tradition. It's like playing meteorological roulette with Phil as the charming furry dealer. We know it's a long shot. Heck, Phil's probably guessing based on whether he had a good squirrel chase that morning. But the thrill of will he, won't he, that's what hooks us. It's not about beating the odds. It's the suspense, and maybe even rooting for the underdog, undergoffer.
I'll play devil's advocate here, Simon. What if Phil's actually onto something? Call me crazy, but what if this whole groundhog business is nature's way of sticking it to our fancy forecasts, like a living, breathing weather app with fur? Yeah, the scientific community might laugh us out of the room, but there's got to be a part of you that loves the idea of Phil as the underdog coming out on top. Imagine if one year he just nails it, right down to the last snowflake.
You know what, Joe? Reminds me of this one time my Uncle Terry decided to fix his leaky roof based on whether or not his old knee was acting up. He'd be like, "Oh, the old knee's quiet today, no rain for a week." And believe it or not, he was spot on more times than the local weather guy that summer. Now it became family lore. We laughed about it, but also kind of waited for Uncle Terry's knee forecast before any big barbecue plans. Maybe we're all searching for our own little Punxsutawney Phil, something quirky and reliable in its own mysterious way.
That's classic, Simon. Let's unpack Uncle Terry's knee alongside Phil's shadow for a sec. We know these methods aren't meteorology, but heck, sometimes they get it right. If we dive into the numbers, studies actually show that since the 1880s, Phil's success rate is around 39%. Now, when you consider that U.S. climate data puts groundhog predictions at a coin toss, about 50% accuracy, it really makes you wonder. These fun, folksy methods hold a place in our hearts because they're part of our narrative, and man, do we love a good story. There's science all around us, our smartphones, satellites, but none have the charm of Phil or an achy knee predicting rain.
Hey, new listeners, if you just tuned in, Joe and I are gabbing about whether there's any meteorological magic to Groundhog Day. We've been chuckling over how Punxsutawney Phil could foretell the weather better than your phone, kinda. The little guy's got a batting average of .392, Not in the major league of forecasting, that's for sure. But hey, who needs 100% accuracy when you've got a crowd pleaser like Phil? Whether it's shadow science or Uncle Terry's weather predicting knee, we're all here for the story and the smiles, not a satellite. Right, folks?
Absolutely. But let's stir the pot a bit more, shall we? Consider this, folks. What if Phil is actually just a front, a furry fall guy for our own fear of the unpredictable? We're clinging to these traditions as if they give us control over the chaos of nature. Yeah, Uncle Terry's knee, Phil's shadow, they're all part of the script we're writing because maybe the real deal, the actual science, is a bit too raw for us. It strips away the narrative, leaves us with cold facts, no room for lore or wonder. Doesn't it make you wonder if we prefer the charm of uncertainty over the bland truth?
You know, they say you can use groundhogs to predict the weather, but all I've learned is that with enough media attention, even a groundhog can land a no-show job once a year. Makes me wonder, if Phil ever actually nails the forecast, do we just throw him a parade or give him a meteorology degree? Picture it. Dr. Punxsutawney Phil with a tiny hat and diploma. Now that's a plot twist.
Let's stick with this for a second, Simon. Phil is Dr. Punxsutawney, PhD. It's hilarious. But the truth is, even if by some fluke he nails the forecast, it doesn't change the science. People love the idea of Phil predicting weather because it gives character to the cold winter. It's not about accuracy, it's the spectacle. A parade for Phil? Sure, why not? But maybe keep the science degrees for the professionals. No offense to Phil's shadow spotting skills.
So, considering Phil's shaky record and our love for the spectacle over science, do you think we're just suckers for a charming story, Joe? Are we all craving that bit of whimsy in the otherwise plain toast of daily life?
Simon, no doubt about it, man. We're all chasing that slice of whimsy. That's what life's about, right? Finding those moments that flip the script on the same old narrative. And heck, if a groundhog and his shadow can give us a break from the grind, make us wonder what if, and actually get us to pause and smile, then yeah, I'd say we're suckers for it, but the good kind. Life's too short for plain toast every day. Sometimes you need a little bit of Groundhog Day jam to mix it up.
Right, Joe. Life's not a science experiment. Sometimes we're just after that mystery meat ingredient that makes it all so finger-licking good. We laugh at Phil's forecasts being wonky, but isn't that the cherry on top? Maybe the fact that he's an unreliable weatherman is exactly why we tune in year after year. It's our collective wink. Let's face it, everyone loves a wild card. Who wants to live in a world where all your news comes straight from high-tech, science-y stuff without any room left for goofing off?
Exactly, Simon. Life needs a bit of that unpredictable wild card energy. After all, where's the fun in a world without some quirkiness? Phil may not be the meteorologist we need, but he might just be the misfit mascot we deserve, a charming break from the routine. But hey, let's leave the door open. Maybe one day, we'll find out his shadow has been trying to tell us something more profound all along. What do you folks think?
You know, Joe, this chat's got my gears turning. Picture a world where everything hinges on that little groundhog. Let's say Phil calls the shots across the board, the whole year's game plan. Can you imagine? The fashion industry dropping their winter line or spring collection smack on February 2nd based on Phil's grand reveal. Farmers out there with bated breath, shovels in hand, waiting for that go-ahead from our furry forecaster. Now that's a topsy-turvy world I bet no one saw coming.
Well, Simon, that's a world tipping the scales of sanity, if you ask me. Farmers leaning on Phil's shadow instead of planting seasons? Madness. And fashionistas swapping scarves for sandals on a groundhog's gamble? Absolute mayhem, but intriguing. What about finance, with stocks rising and falling on the winks and nods of a marmot meteorologist? Or sports schedules flipping to avoid the so-called 6 more weeks of winter? It's chaos in motion, but admit it, part of you wants to see how it unfolds.
Joe, it's like peeking behind a curtain into an alternate universe. Man, my brain can barely wrap around this groundhog-guided globe. Stocks tumbling because Phil got spooked by his own shadow? Absolutely bonkers, but maybe there's a twisted part of me that finds it thrilling. Picture a world where all our plans and prep hang on the edge of a yes or no from the animal kingdom. It's chaotic, nonsensical, yet somehow weirdly electrifying.
You're not off base, Simon. It's a gold mine for chaos theorists. But dig this. Historically, societies have often looked to animals for signs, like the Romans watching birds. Fast forward to our groundhog-governed world, and think about the data analytics companies that would spring up, all aimed at deciphering Phil's behavior patterns. They'd be combining folklore with cutting-edge tech, trying to give Wall Street traders an edge based on rodent psychology. And hey, what about education? Schools suddenly shifting curriculums, pushing hibernation studies to the forefront. I mean, it's out there, but history shows our fascination with nature's cues isn't new. It's just got a modern, furry twist.
You're hitting something deep there, Joe. Reminds me of my fifth grade science fair project. Wanted to prove my hamster, Mr. Nibbles, could predict my math test scores based on how much he ran on his wheel the night before. Set up charts, logged hours, and had a whole system. I was dead serious, convinced there was a pattern. Teachers thought I was off my rocker, but you should have seen their faces when Mr. Nibbles' predictions lined up a couple times. It's not far from what we're talking about now, taking cues from our furry friends. Phil might lead to some hamster wheel forecasting firms, and I'd be all set with experience straight from Mrs. Becker's fifth grade class. Wild times, man.
Haha, a hamster as a financial analyst. Talk about forecasting furry tales. But here's where I think we're spinning our own wheels. Let's get real. If Mr. Nibbles randomly got it right, consider the chaos if everyone hung their hats on Phil's shadow. Picture architects freezing plans mid-sketch because Phil called for more winter, or worldwide travel schedules scrambling after a sunny February 2nd. It's hilarious at a glance, meandering into lunacy once you hit the gas. Hamsters and groundhogs might rule the meme world, but if they started running our reality, buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy ride down the rabbit, or should I say, groundhog hole.
Man, Joe, you're right. If our world actually spun on the axis of Phil's shadow, we'd be in a hot mess. Think about it. From science to sports, everyone would be on edge perpetually. There's some charm to the chaos, sure, but living it, that's a whole other level of bonkers. The constant flip-flopping and second-guessing every forecast. Nah, I'll pass. What we've got is already a roller coaster. Throw in a groundhog with director's clout, and I might just lose my lunch. No joke. Let's stick to laughing at the legend rather than living it.
Imagine if Phil got a taste of power, Simon. One day he's just predicting weather. The next, he's sitting in a director's chair yelling "cut" when he doesn't like how spring is unfolding. "This scene needs more frost," he'd say, throwing snowflakes like confetti. We'd have to reshoot winter scenes in June. Next thing you know, he's negotiating his contract, demanding organic carrots on set and asking for his own trailer. Stay humble, Phil. Don't go Hollywood on us.
Wait, Phil, in the director's chair? If that fuzzy little guy starts calling the shots on springtime, we'd all be living in a seasonal sitcom. No script needed. Imagine him vetoing an early bloom because he wasn't ready for his close-up. Back to your trailers, tulips and daffodils. And don't even get me started if he starts demanding only red carpet-worthy worms for breakfast. Talk about a reality show I need a season pass for.
All right, Simon, diving deeper into that garden of thought. Do you really think we'd be tuning in with bated breath each day to see which whims Phil's got planned for us? Would our real-time Seasons by Phil end up as must-see TV, or just a channel we flip past laughing, shaking our heads at the absurdity?
Oh, absolutely, Joe. We'd be hooked. Not must-see TV, must-live reality. Imagine flipping to the Weather Phil channel, half exasperated, half excited. What's it going to be, Phil? Do I need snow boots or flip-flops today? The next thing you know, he's dropping cliffhangers like an A-list showrunner. Cancel all my meetings. I'm not missing the season finale when Phil finally decides if we get a summer this year. An absurd, eyebrow-raising spectacle for sure, but isn't that the kind of twist that keeps life interesting?
Hey, newcomers, you've just jumped into the wildest convo. Joe and Simon here trying to wrap our heads around a year where Punxsutawney Phil, the groundhog, is calling all the major life shots. From fashionistas timing their trends to farmers planting crops based on his shadow, we rambled through a topsy-turvy world where this furry critter's whims dictate daily life. We even mused about Seasons by Phil becoming the next big reality hit. Crazy? Absolutely. A good time imagining it? Definitely. Stick around, we're just getting started.
You said it, Joe. It's been one wild ride that's had us grinning from ear to ear. The thought of Phil running the show has taken our imaginations on a marathon with no finish line. Every time I picture it, farmers, fashion moguls, heck, even finance folks hanging on a groundhog's predictions, I've got a chuckle. It's the kind of off-the-wall banter that keeps this podcast fresh. You think you've heard it all, then bam, Phil's your go-to guy for the forecast. It's bonkers, but hey, what a blast thinking it through.
Totally, Simon. Now, you mentioned earlier your science fair project where Mr. Nibbles played fortune teller with your math test outcomes. Got me thinking, do you believe in instincts and oddball predictions in life, or are you strictly by the book when it comes to planning ahead?
You know, Joe, sometimes life's more fun when you wing it, gives it a little zest. Sure, planning has its place, but where's the thrill without a dash of unpredictability? I mean, Mr. Nibbles had his moments. It wasn't all science and stats. Makes you wonder about the hidden wisdom in those wild hunches, right? Could there be something to these furry forecasters beyond pure chance? Who knows? Maybe it's not such a Groundhog Day after all.
It's fascinating, Simon. Our dance with Mr. Nibbles' wheel, Phil's shadow, we're drawn to predict, like moths to a flame. There's this human itch to peek ahead. Think about it. Ancient oracles, tea leaves, stock market algorithms, we're hooked on what's next. It's this constant tango with time and the unknown. We've swapped out shamans for smartphones, but does tech scratch that same mystical itch? Or is it just us trying to outsmart change and uncertainty? What's your take?
I'm just spitballing here, Joe, but isn't it all about control? We're tickled by the idea of grabbing the steering wheel from fate. From ancients scanning stars to us scouring over spreadsheets, it's that hunger to master time, claim a win over change. We've ditched the crystal balls for data models, but the crave to call the shots? That's ageless. And technology, man, it's like a backstage pass we think can get us closer to tomorrow's script. The wanna know what's next game? Tech's just our latest play.
But let's kick the tires on that thought for a sec. Control? Maybe it's more about comfort, Simon. We wrap ourselves in predictions like a security blanket. It's less about dominating the future and more about bracing against the night's cold uncertainty. Tech, with all its shining digits and data points, offers a warm illusion of order in chaos. It's not always about manipulating outcomes. Sometimes it's just craving a whisper of reassurance. Heads up, here's what comes next. Is tech our latest toy or perhaps our oldest lullaby?
Comfort? Joe, that hits soft, but I've got another spin. Maybe it's not just about seeking warmth in the tech glow. It might be a wild mix, like a game we're psyched to play where sometimes we score and other times, well, eat dirt. Sure, it's comforting to feel like tomorrow's weather isn't from left field, but aren't we also buzzing for those shots when we nail it? When predictions pan out, we're rock stars in our own life concert. Tech's not just some lullaby. It's the stage lights for our showtime with fate.
Speaking of rock stars and stages, reminds me of my first major live podcast event. Picture this. I've done my homework, script tighter than a drum kit. But as lights dim, something wild happens. I toss the script. There's this electric current in spontaneity. Every unscripted joke, each unrehearsed banter with the crowd. It's alive, unpredictable. Guess what? That night was a smash hit, Simon. Proof that while we crave accuracy, sometimes ditching the forecast for freestyle is where magic happens. It's not about predicting the applause, it's earning it, raw and real time.
Whoa, hold up. You went off script at a live event? That's wild, Joe. It's like cooking without a recipe. Taking that leap, it's gutsy, but it shows something huge. Maybe we're wired for this guessing game with life, but crave to jazz it up with improv. Ditching predictions can launch us into epic moments where we really shine. Live, uncut, no safety net. Makes you think, maybe the magic's in not knowing the punchline till it pops out of your mouth. That's human and hilariously real.
You got it, Simon. Living on the edge of the unknown, letting life swing without always calling the shots. How do you think ditching our endless prediction game could shape us? Could spontaneity be the unsung hero in the play of life?
Spontaneity's cool, but hold up. Predicting's not just an old habit to shake off. It keeps life on rails. Without it, we might just be improv actors lost on a stage with no lines. Knowing what could happen tomorrow means less bumping in the dark. It's having a map when you're deep in the woods. In that sense, predictions are like breadcrumbs back to sanity when life throws us a wild curveball. Forecasts keep folks from going all Humpty Dumpty off the wall. And hey, some peace in knowing ain't such a bad gig, right?
Rolling with your thoughts, Simon, there's a line to toe between wild guesses and playing it safe. Yeah, predictions offer a blueprint, a guide through the chaos. But if we cling too tight, do we box out brilliance? Straying from that breadcrumb trail could unearth brilliance we'd never find on the beaten path. Preparedness has its place, no doubt, but so does the leap into the unplanned, the domain where humanity often finds its most remarkable breakthroughs. Balance, man, that's the ticket.
Balance? That's one of those sneaky big deal concepts, isn't it? I'm sitting here nodding like a bobblehead because it's spot on. Play it too safe and you never color outside the lines. But who wants to live life completely sketchy? Predicting stuff is cozy and all, but if we're too sure about what tomorrow's paint by numbers looks like, do we ever get bold enough to sling a surprise hue on the canvas? Embracing a dash of mayhem, that's where the art happens.
Totally hear you on the art of mayhem, Simon. So what's your take? Do we need to start splashing more of these surprise hues around? How do you balance the cozy with the sketchy in your own life?
Sketchy, huh? Joe, my life's like a seesaw. Sometimes I'm all bring it on to chaos. Other times I need that cozy crystal ball so I don't flip out. Sure, tossing a random hue sounds thrilling, but let's not forget those ops moments when the paint splatters on the wrong part of life's mural. It takes some real nerve to walk that tightrope between spontaneity and the comfy crystal ball clutching, right? Can't be all jazz hands without stubbing a toe now and then. But hey, maybe stubbed toes are just part of the dance.
Stubbing toes may just be par for the life dance course, Simon. This tightrope walk of prediction versus improvisation, it's intricate, isn't it? Sometimes jazz hands lead to a surprise standing ovation. Other times, we're left nursing those stubbed toes. On that note, I'm curious, what do you think is the next step in our collective dance with prediction and spontaneity? How will we keep painting this ever-evolving picture?
Speaking of painting pictures and all this talk about predictions, it's kind of like farming, right? You plant seeds, hoping for sunshine, but prepare for rain. Interestingly enough, ever stumbled upon the Old Farmer's Almanac, Joe? That's an OG crystal ball from 1792, super vital for farmers dropping seeds according to stars and seasons. It's kind of like their prediction playbook, pre-tech big data in paper form with a side of folklore. Pretty neat combo, don't you think?
Absolutely. The Old Farmer's Almanac is a testament to human ingenuity. Before apps and AI, farmers had these pages that mingled astronomy with agriculture. It's genius, really. They were laying down seeds with faith in patterns scribed from the skies, lines blurring between science and old wives' tales. This almanac was their dashboard of divination for when to sow, when to reap, crucial stuff before our screens started dictating daily deeds. It's wild how it's still around, tapping into that same ancient prediction game we've always played.
Hold up. Let's not romanticize it too much. That almanac's a mixed bag. Knitting together science with folklore, cool concept, but hit or miss with accuracy, right? We've come a long way since reading Weather by woolly worms and persimmon seeds. The wisdom's folksy, but our pinpoint satellite snapshots are the real deal today. Still, gotta hand it to the almanac for sticking around. It's more nostalgia than NASA for our planting pals. Makes you wonder why we cling to tradition when tech's teeming with tidbits on tap.
Can't deny the nostalgia, Simon. There's a charm to the old school that tech can't touch. Even with all our advancements, there's a pull towards tradition. It feels human. It tugs at the heartstrings, doesn't it? Makes you stop and respect the tried and true rituals handed down through generations. Sure, we've got the tech to predict almost anything now, but sometimes flipping through an almanac's crinkly pages connects us to the wisdom of yesteryear, to history, a route no gadget can replace.
Joe, you're nailing it with that touch of tradition. Makes me think, Are we craving a connection to our roots more now because the world's spinning into this ultra-digital age? Could clinging to something like the Farmer's Almanac be our way of keeping grounded in the midst of all the tech static?
Hey, new listeners! Jumping into the mix, we've been chewing over the old Farmer's Almanac. Picture this, a book from 1792 that helped farmers predict the best times to plant and harvest before we had weather apps in our pockets. Simon and I are marveling at how these traditions persist in a digital world to keep us tethered to our past, wrapping up the beauty of blending folklore with farming. Real old school meets high-tech discussion here. Stay tuned for more.
Sure, these traditions last. Charm's one thing, but let's be honest. Are farmers today really checking the almanac before firing up their tractors and drones? The practical side of me thinks, nostalgia aside, we're not looking for signs in entrails or how high the hornet's nest is. People might leaf through for fun, but bets are they're glancing at their phones for forecasts to plan their day in the fields. Old school meets tech, Joe, but guess which one's winning the race?
Well, Simon, nostalgia's strong, but let's not forget, the almanac wasn't just about weather predictions. It was a one-stop shop for everything from planting charts to life advice and even recipes. The wisdom in there is timeless, like when to wean animals or the best days for fishing. There's something about this bundle of folk wisdom and hard facts that represents a bridge between past and present. Sure, it's no match to modern tech and precision farming, but its cultural imprint, that stands unshaken. It's a slice of agricultural heritage living on shelves and in hearts today.
That's a solid point about the almanac's enduring charm and practical tips. Do you think there's stuff in there that's actually stood the test of time? Something we might overlook with all our gadgets and gizmos?
Absolutely, Simon. The old Farmer's Almanac might not be the go-to for precision farming, but it's a trove when it comes to timeless agrarian wisdom. For instance, crop rotation and soil management advice, there are gold. These practices don't age. The basics of nurturing the land remain constant. Gadgets evolve, but the earth doesn't. Sometimes it's those analog methods that save you when tech fails or power wanes. There's understated brilliance in time-tested experience. It's quiet, sure, but ever so resilient.
Hold the phone. Crop rotation and managing dirt is in that dusty old thing. Look at them hiding golden nuggets among the moon phases and fish stories. Tech is flashy, but when your tablet's dead, good luck asking Siri how to deal with your stubborn carrots. Gotta tip my hat. Maybe this almanac's secretly clutch for the Green Thumb gang after all. Who knew? Well, apparently our ancestors. But you get me.
Whoa, Simon, you're getting it. It's like, we've got all this high-tech gear, right? But at the end of the day, when your back's against the wall or your tractor's down, it's that old-timey knowledge that stands up. Those are the fundamentals, the classics, and they come through. Doesn't matter how much tech you have if you don't understand the basics of what makes things grow. It's wild, man. That almanac, it's like the martial arts of farming, ancient but deadly effective.
Haha, martial arts of farming. Love it. Old school wisdom with a roundhouse kick. Tech's got nothing on that.
Let's not crown it just yet, though. I mean, come on, martial arts is one thing, but farming's a whole different ring to battle in. The almanac has its slick moves like those crop tips, but let's face it, it won't hold a candle against GPS-guided planting or AI-driven pest control. These tech wizards are spinning farming into futuristic fairy tales. Can tradition keep up, or will almanacs become relics, dusted off for a quaint read by the fireplace? That's the real standoff here.
True, tech's casting a spell over the fields with some serious sorcery. But methinks tradition still has a few tricks up its sleeve. There's a balance to be found, alchemy, if you will, where ancient wisdom works hand in hand with all our newfangled gadgets. Imagine stirring the pot with both, the almanac's down-to-earth classics buoyed by high-tech hocus-pocus. Now that's a recipe for an agricultural renaissance.
You've got a point there, Simon. Finding harmony between tradition and technology could spark a whole new era in agriculture. Why choose one when you can blend the two for something extraordinary? Alchemy of agriculture. Now that's a concept ripe for exploration. How exactly do we weave these threads together to strengthen our roots and branches, both on the farm and beyond? Let's keep that pot simmering.
You know, from blending tradition and tech, it makes me think about the actual predictions in these almanacs. How do they even figure that stuff out? I've heard some wild stories where those predictions hit the target dead on. But really, can charming old charts truly stack up against our satellite data and computer models? There's a spicy stew of science and superstition to unpack there. What's your take, Joe? Predictive patterns or just pleasant fiction?
Simon, you've stumbled onto a real head-scratcher. Almanacs blend observations like moon cycles with folklore, but comparing that to modern weather tech, it's apples and oranges. We're talking about crunching massive data sets and running simulations versus reading nature's signs. A gritty charm for sure, but pleasant fiction up against today's meteorology. I like a good underdog story as much as the next guy, but my money's on the satellite over the scarecrow here.
So we're orbiting back to my underdog comment. All right, I'm saying the satellite's the heavyweight champ, and the scarecrow, well, he's out in the field soaking up folksy wisdom without a tech in sight. Satellites use real-time hardcore data to make forecasts. The almanac, it makes educated guesses based on patterns and stories from yesteryear. Sure, it's got its wins. Who doesn't love a good David versus Goliath tale? But when it comes to reliable weather predictions, modern methods knock it out of the park.
Not to rain on your parade, Simon, but let's not totally discount the almanac's value. You're right about satellites and tech, they're unbeatable for accuracy. Yet here's the kicker. Sometimes those old patterns have merit. Ever think that maybe there's wisdom hidden in those rhymes and signs? It harks back to when people had to read the skies, animals, and plants to survive. There's history there, a different kind of knowledge. Untapped, it's just quaint, but put to use, who knows? Maybe there's a sliver of the predictive power we're too clouded by tech to see.
Oh yeah, Joe, there's ancient wisdom. No one's knocking the sky readers of old. But let's be real. Can Aunt May's arthritis predicting rain compete with Doppler radar? Forecasting seasons and storms isn't some rub a frog belly for good luck situation. It needs to be on point. Lives and crops depend on it. That predictive power of old might have its moments, but when push comes to shove, you don't want a rhyme about crickets telling you if it's time to harvest or head for the hills.
No argument here, Simon. Aunt May's joints are no match for Doppler indeed. Science cuts through folklore like a scythe. Lives, livelihoods, modern meteorology is essential for these stakes. A farmer listening to his arthritis over the Weather Channel? That's not just quaint, it's risky business. The almanac might have some decent guesswork based on cycles, but that's playing darts in the dark compared to the floodlights of current weather science. It ultimately boils down to what tool gives you the edge to prepare and act. Sentimentality doesn't stand a chance against safety and certainty.
Definitely, Joe. It's a touching nod to the past, respecting those almanac predictions. It's like wearing your granddad's old hat. Charming and full of stories, but when the storm hits, you'll want that high-tech waterproof gear. Tradition has its place, and it warms the heart, but when stakes are sky high, I'm reaching for the tool belt with the latest and safest gadgets. The romance of the past is sweet until you're the one getting soaked.
Ha, you're spot on, Simon. It's good to respect and remember where we came from. It keeps us grounded. But when it comes down to brass tacks, I'm all about whatever works best. You can love Granddad's hat and still appreciate not getting drenched. Like, who doesn't want the past to guide us? But let's be real, I don't want to romanticize getting soaked when I could have just checked my weather app. Let history inform the present, but not at the cost of common sense, right?
Absolutely, I'll toast to that. History's the appetizer. It gets your palate ready for the main course, but doesn't fill you up. Our ancestors forecasted weather with bones and stones, and we're here under our high-tech umbrellas nodding in thanks. But let's not kid ourselves into thinking those methods were bulletproof. Predictive patterns got us this far for sure, but today, if I've got a weather app flashing a tornado warning, I'm not about to step outside asking Mother Nature for her 2 cents.
Wow, forecasting weather with bones and stones? No way they relied on that. I mean, it paints a picture, right? Primitive, but fascinating. You've got to admire the ingenuity of working with what you've got. Still, can you imagine dismissing today's tech for those ancient methods? There's old school charm, and then there's just plain ignoring progress. I'm all for honoring our history, but let's not get so nostalgic we forget to duck when the high-tech radar says something's coming our way.
Hey Joe, no one was really forecasting weather with bones. We're not in a fantasy novel. But there is something to their methods that's more than just charm. Almanacs use astronomy like phases of the moon, legit science stuff. Early farmers used stars and plants as natural guides. Phenology, it's called. Plus, prediction wasn't willy-nilly. They recorded weather patterns over the years for predictions, which isn't too different from collecting data today, just old-school style. They weren't dead-on like our tech, but they weren't flying blind either. And hey, gotta respect the building blocks of modern meteorology, right?
Man, you're absolutely right, Simon. There's definitely a thread connecting the dots from what those early sky watchers did to the tech we've got today. Hearing that they weren't just winging it and actually had systems in place, albeit primitive compared to ours, that's humbling. There's a raw beauty in watching phases of the moon and learning nature's rhythms. Laying the foundation for what comes next, they were the original data scientists in their own right. We stand on the shoulders of giants, my friend, even if some of those giants were squinting at the stars instead of screens.
Giants squinting at stars, that's rich. But here's the kicker. Those data scientists were just winging it compared to today. We're not just standing on shoulders. We've strapped on jetpacks and are flying miles above. The old-timers handed us a compass, sure, but now we've got GPS. Predictions in almanacs? More like throwing darts at a cloudy dartboard. Accurate weather prediction isn't mystical, it's scientific. And there's nothing raw about freezing, because your almanac didn't mention the cold front swooping in.
Wait, predicting weather with a compass compared to GPS? Now that's quite the leap. But it does put things in perspective. It's a bit funny imagining our ancestors huddled around an almanac, trying to predict next week's rain. Sure, they noted patterns. They weren't exactly shooting arrows in the dark. But let's face it, their cold front predictions probably left many shivering unexpectedly. Maybe that's why everyone had those huge fireplaces back in the day. Still, the charm of those times doesn't really make up for frostbite, does it?
That's just it. While those bygone methods have their appeal, I'd trade a huge fireplace for central heating any day. So almanacs are quaint, but I wouldn't bet my farm on them. The old ways laid down tracks, and now we're riding the high-speed weather train. Who knows, though? Maybe there's some forgotten nugget of wisdom in the old almanac still waiting to be uncovered that could surprise us all one day. But until then, I'll stick with checking my phone before heading out. What else you got on your mind, Joe?
Speaking of ancient wisdom and weather predictions, have you ever delved into the zany world where astrology meets agriculture? I came across this outrageous bit in an old almanac, suggesting that if Mercury is in retrograde, it's prime time to plant your pumpkins, or they'll turn out as funny-looking as a clown's nose. Can you imagine farmers out in the field consulting star charts instead of soil samples? That's one way to carve out a space for comedy at the Harvest Festival.
Oh, totally. Imagine planting those bad boys during a full moon and ending up with pumpkins that only come out at night, ready to party with the werewolves. Or better yet, Venus in alignment with Jupiter, and you've got gourds so big they're applying for their own zip codes. Sorry, kids, no pumpkin pie this year. Our pumpkin just signed a lease for an apartment downtown. It's like the cosmos is plotting a sitcom with our squash.
That's the spirit, cosmic comedy gold right there. Picture this. Mars is in the 7th house. Your pumpkins are now so competitive they're starting their own sports league. Or Saturn's rings are perfectly tilted. Boom! Your pumpkins are suddenly more disciplined than monks and growing in perfect geometric patterns. And let's not even touch on what happens when Uranus is involved. The pumpkins might just rebel and take over the farm themselves, hosting intergalactic gourd summits. The stars are aligning for some truly mystic melon madness, my friend.
Hold the ho, Joe. As hilarious as rebellious pumpkins sound, let's dial it back. I mean, a pumpkin sports league under Mars influence? We'd be knee-deep in gourd gladiators. But here's a twist. What if Neptune's misty vibe turns your patch into the ultimate spa retreat for veggies? Pumpkins so relaxed, they can't even bother to become jack-o'-lanterns. They're too busy zenning out. Or Pluto. Yeah, that planet, still a planet in my show, gives them an identity crisis. And now they think they're cucumbers. Stellar guidance is all fun and games until your harvest doesn't know what the heck it even is.
Let's rewind and look at where this cosmic crop guidance comes from. Back in the day, farmers didn't just turn to astrology for a laugh. It was part of biodynamic farming. This approach actually dates back to the early 20th century and merges spiritual insights with agricultural practices. It's rooted in the teachings of Rudolf Steiner. Yeah, the same guy behind Waldorf schools. He thought cosmic forces really could affect plant growth. So following lunar cycles, planetary positions, and even zodiac signs were serious business for deciding when to sow and reap. While we're cracking jokes about pumpkin leagues and veggie spas, which honestly I'd pay to see, their celestial planting calendar wasn't pulled out of thin air. They had observations and records, like planting root crops during a descending moon phase, thinking it encouraged downward growth. So think of this as the organic ancestor to our high-tech agriculture sensors, farmers looking to the heavens instead of handheld devices. Even though their methods verge on mystical, there's a kind of retroactive charm in considering that perhaps they touched on something elemental that modern science zoomed past in its hurry. And hey, who says you can't still have a little fun imagining the astrological antics influencing your autumn harvest?
Sure, Steiner's methods could be onto something, like maybe there's a cosmic USB stick we're not plugging into. It adds some zing to the farming thing and makes me wonder, what if we hosted a gardening show under the stars? Picture it, Astro Agri Hour, where your horoscope meets your crop scope. Could be a stellar hit or a cosmic miss.
Ah, that takes me back to my Uncle Ned's farm. He was a tech skeptic, loved his farmer's almanac more than his smartphone. One evening, just for kicks, we're out there with an old telescope and his tattered almanac, playing astrologers rather than farmers. We seriously attempted to plant by the moon's phase, consulting this starburst chart that looked like a pizza dropped on a planetarium floor. We planted everything astrologically correct, or so we thought. Fast forward to harvest, and our pumpkins had personalities. Some were sprawling everywhere, others barely budged from being seeds. Uncle Ned swears it was because we mixed up Capricorn with Cancer. It was pure chaos fueled by cosmic cues. But even amidst the bedlam, that was the most colorful crop he'd ever grown. Can't say if it was the stellar alignment or just dumb luck, but those pumpkins turned heads at the county fair for sure.
Even the stars couldn't have predicted Uncle Ned's rogue pumpkin patch. Maybe there's a twinkle of truth in astrology after all, or maybe those pumpkins were just showing off. Either way, it turned into one interstellar harvest spectacle.
Astrological flair in farming, it's a romantic notion, sure. But when we start crediting star alignments for the quality of our crops, I've got to chuckle. It's like saying you aced the test because Mercury was in Gatorade, or whatever they say. If your pumpkins are sprouting up with more personality than the contestants on a reality TV show, maybe it's less about cosmic influence and more about cross-pollination gone wild. Interesting? Maybe. Cosmic intervention? As likely as me turning down a second slice of pumpkin pie, which for the record, is not going to happen.
I guess we'll just have to leave the cosmic comedy to the universe's stand-up routine. But whether it's Mercury in Gatorade or cross-pollination mayhem, I've got a hunch our pumpkin pie horoscope says there's more laughter on the horizon, especially if Uncle Ned's involved. So what's up next, Joe? Got any more wild theories to toss into our psychic salad?
Sticking with Uncle Ned and his cosmic crop capers, it brings us to a bigger question. How does that old-time wisdom stand up in today's fast-paced agri-tech world? Can the past teach future farmers anything useful? Or is it all just pumpkin pie in the sky? With climate change shaking up the scene, there's this crucial balance to strike between sustained traditions and new-age solutions. Could those long-forgotten almanac tips be the missing puzzle piece in our eco-friendly farming future?
One summer, I volunteered at this heritage farm, right? They're all about organic methods, no tech machinery, and the farm manager, let's call her Aunt May. Aunt May was like a walking almanac. Now, the crazy thing is, this one plot, she insisted on planting it by the farmer's almanac's suggestions. Moon phase, companion planting, you name it. We were split into teams. One followed Aunt May's old school strategy, the other went full modern with all the gadgets. Months roll by, and wouldn't you know it, both plots thrived, but in different ways. Her plot didn't have the biggest yield, but the flavors, Joe. The veggies tasted like they had been marinated in tradition. It made me think, maybe there's room at the table for both high-tech and heirloom wisdom. In an ever-changing climate, having that mixed bag of tricks could be the key.
Totally, Simon. I think it boils down to practicality and results, right? If Aunt May's almost mystical methods churn out incredible tasting veggies with just some moonlight mojo and companion planting, we shouldn't write that off as old hat. We've got drones mapping fields, sensors gauging soil moisture, but all that doesn't necessarily mean better food on our plates. Blending groundbreaking tech with grounded tradition? That could deliver us the knockout punch in farming amidst a climate crisis. Could be worth a shot. Slash tires on the tractor and let the stars steer for a change.
Aunt May and her out-of-this-world veggies? That's pretty wild. So you're telling me the old-school magic might actually have something on modern tech? Being a bit of a gadget geek myself, I'm skeptical. But hey, if her moon-drenched carrots taste like they've been kissed by Mother Nature, that's science fiction turned fact in my book. Maybe this throwback farming has some creds. In the face of climate chaos, the more arrows in our quiver the better, right? Could be the time for pitchforks and smartphones to team up and go green together.
You've nailed it. As much as I love tech, who doesn't enjoy the idea of a drone delivering breakfast? You can't argue with results like Aunt May's. We're living in an era where Silicon Valley could team up with Old MacDonald, and I'm not mad about it. There's got to be space for both in our future food story. Sure, climate change is throwing us curveballs faster than a major league pitcher, but maybe that blend of past wisdom and present innovation is our best bet to hit a home run for sustainable farming. It's not just growing crops, it's growing hope. And hey, maybe even some tastier carrots. And with that food for thought, let's wrap this episode up. Thanks for tuning in to another juicy session here on Infinite Podcast. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you've enjoyed our cosmic journey from astrology to agritech. Keep your thoughts ripe and ready for our next conversation, where we'll no doubt dig into another heaping pile of food for thought. Catch you next time.
For our latecomers, we just wrapped up a barnstormer about old-school farming wisdom. Joe and I chewed the cud over whether Aunt May's almanac antics, think planting by moonlight, could still stand tall in today's climate crisis farmyard. Turns out, her veggies were practically somersaulting with flavor, which got us thinking, should we be weaving this ancestral thread through our techno-agriculture tapestry? Could drones be dancing with scarecrows to grow tomorrow's supercrops? It's food for thought with a side of hope. Catch the full convo to harvest all the juicy details.
Well, if Aunt May's veggie plot was a tech company, she'd be out there pitching Farm-to-Table 2.0, now with more moon. I'm sure investors would just eat that up, or at least the carrots. Maybe in the next agri-startup pitch meeting, we'll hear our disruptive innovation, ancient wisdom. Strap on your overalls and grab a crystal. We're coding by starlight, folks. Forget Silicon Valley. It's Soilcon Valley from here on out.
Soilcon Valley, huh? That's got a ring to it. Could be we're on the cusp of something groundbreaking, mixing star charts with smart charts. Who knows? Maybe our next deep dive will unearth how these Soilcon Valley startups are sprouting up like weeds, meshing mystic roots with modern fruits. Stay tuned. Our cosmic pitchfork is just getting warmed up.
Speaking of cosmic conditions and star-filled skies, it's not just the position of the planets farmers need to keep an eye on. Weather forecasts are kind of like the daily horoscope for agriculture. Modern meteorology is basically a goldmine for the green-thumbed. Diving into that, Simon, how do you think those cloud predictions play into the almighty dollar signs in today's farming economy?
Joe, weather forecasts are crucial, sure, But let's not forget how many times I've planned a beach day only to pack up under an unexpected thunderstorm. Farmers planning their entire season around these forecasts? That's rolling the dice with Mother Nature holding all the chips. Inaccurate predictions can lead to planting blunders or harvest havoc. Imagine you prep for drought and it floods. There goes your high-stakes game of Farmville. We're playing with livelihoods here. Betting on sunny skies in this economy is like trusting a blindfolded fortune teller. It's risky business at its best.
While that's a down-to-earth take, it's not all doom and gloom. Farming might feel like a gamble, but today's weather forecasting isn't just some back-alley dice game, Simon. It's evolved into a high-tech affair with satellites, supercomputers, and AI, all teaming up to give farmers the edge. Sure, no forecast is fail-proof, but precision has shot up. Farmers use these tools to make informed decisions. It's about playing the odds with the best hand science can deal. And when those predictions hit, it's less about luck and more strategic play, saving crops and cash in an industry where both are as vital as rain.
Hey, I hear you on the tech angle. It's incredible how we've leveled up from tossing hay into the air to supercomputers crunching weather data. I remember chatting with a farmer pal who gets alerts on his phone about when to water and what pest might be hitchhiking on a warm front. It's like he's got a weather wizard in his pocket. It's pretty mind-blowing. Making every drop of rain count adds up to serious green, not just in the fields, but in those bank accounts too. If that forecast nails it, that's not just some sunny day. It's payday for our hard-working farm folks.
Yeah, having a weather wizard in your pocket sounds neat, Simon. But let's not pretend our farmer friends are walking away with the sorcerer's stone every harvest. High-tech weather alerts and precision farming, it's powerful stuff. Yet one wrong move from Mother Nature and all those fancy forecasts might as well be random guesses from a magic 8-ball. Plus, think about small-scale farmers without access to that tech. They're still out there eyeing the skies like ancients. And let's not even get started on how this ties into the stock market. Commodity trading based on weather predictions is a high-risk chess game. It can turn Wall Street into Worry Street real fast when the clouds don't play by the rules.
Joe, you said it. Commodity markets quake in their boots over these predictions. But here's the flip. Accurate forecasts have also saved more bacon than a vegetarian butcher. Let's say they predict a deluge. Savvy traders can brace for impact. It's not just flying by the seat of your pants. The science behind meteorology today provides insights that are light years ahead of Farmer Almanac's best guesses, and farm economics thrive on this. Despite the misses, the hits can mean the difference between boom or bust for farmers big and small. This isn't just about rolling dice. It's strategic planning with satellites as your scouts.
Really? So, weather forecasts affect commodity trading that much? I can see the stakes here for the agricultural sector. Accurate weather forecasts aren't just handy, they're critical to economic survival. Makes sense. Extreme weather can wipe out crops or bring a bumper harvest. Totally blows my mind to think how this intersection of meteorology and farming isn't just about best guesses. It's sophisticated risk management. Like, you've got Wall Street brokers tuned into the same channels as farmers, both biting their nails over rain clouds. Wild times. Imagine being that farmer watching storm clouds roll in, knowing it could make or break your year. Talk about a high-pressure system.
Absolutely, Joe. It's like the ultimate game of high-stakes poker, with nature holding all the wild cards. Whether on the farm or trading floor, those forecasts are worth their weight in gold or grain to keep it farm fresh.
Seriously, Simon, when you think about it, the modern farmer's got to have the instincts of a Vegas card shark and the insights of a meteorological guru just to stay afloat. They're constantly crunching data and placing bets on incoming storms or heat waves that could flip markets upside down. Every percentage point in forecast accuracy translates not just into bushels of corn, but cold, hard cash. Weather forecasting in agribusiness isn't just for planting seeds. It's about sowing financial stability in a market that's as tumultuous as spring weather. High stakes, more like sky-high stakes.
Hold on a sec, Joe. Imagine relying solely on high-tech forecasts and you get blindsided by a freak storm. There's something to be said for the gut feelings and generational know-how of seasoned farmers. We can't dismiss the value of intuition built from years of watching the skies. This combo of instinct plus innovation, well, that might just be the real winning ticket. It grounds all that data in reality, reminding us that tech is a tool, not the oracle.
You're hitting on something vital there, Simon. So how do you see that balance playing out? Can the tech-savvy forecasting and old-school gut instincts actually coexist on the farm? Or is it more of a tug-of-war between tradition and technology?
Oh, it's a classic face-off, Joe. Old-timers with weather-worn faces squinting at the sky versus tech whizzes glued to screens. But here's my hot take. Why not both? It's like peanut butter and jelly. Different, but together, they're magic. The know-how that comes from years in the fields is irreplaceable. Pair that with precision tech, and you've got yourself an all-weather, all-terrain farming machine. Coexistence is key. We can't let one bulldoze the other. It's got to be more synchronized swimming than tug-of-war.
I get your point, Simon, but let's not kid ourselves. Old-school farming smarts are like a flip phone at a tech conference, nostalgic, but kinda out of place. Weather forecasting has become so precise that it can eclipse years of staring at the clouds. The data-driven approach allows for planning and responses that intuition alone could never match. High tech helps prevent disasters, boosts efficiency, and ultimately pulls in the profits. While traditional knowledge shouldn't be tossed aside like yesterday's newspaper, we can't afford to romanticize it when tomorrow's yields and livelihoods are on the line.
Whoa. Put the brakes on that tech train for a sec, Joe. You're talking like guesswork and gut feelings are due to go extinct. But listen up. Tradition has its charms. Like an old tractor that won't quit, there's a reliability and experience you can't download from any app. Sure, modern meteorology is king in crunching numbers, but let's give a nod to the wisdom that doesn't come with a USB port. It's the blend of the two that keeps the soil and the cash flowing. High-tech farming, without a sprinkle of that old-school magic, is like a scarecrow forgetting how to scare crows. It's only doing half its job.
I hear you loud and clear on holding on to tradition, Simon. But honestly, when it's about keeping a farm profitable and feeding the masses, clinging to old ways without evolving with new tech is like bringing a horse to a car race. You're left in the dust. The farming industry needs to leverage every innovation to outpace the unpredictable whims of weather. We can't brush off progress for sentimentality. The right blend does include tradition, sure, but that scale should tip generously toward technology, especially as climate craziness ramps up. Because when it comes to feeding people and making a living, farmers need all the accuracy they can harvest.
I'm not saying we chuck tech out the barn door, but let's not pretend a satellite can teach you how to read the land like a fifth-generation farmer with dirt under his nails. I mean, ever seen a supercomputer pull a calf? Tech is just one piece of the puzzle, Joe. Here's a hunch. Tossing wisdom out for gadgets might leave us missing what no algorithm can predict. Remember when that high-tech forecast said sunny days ahead and farmers faced a monsoon season instead? Took cloudy with a chance of profit way too literally. When it comes down to it, that laptop can't plant seeds or fix a fence. So yeah, lean on tech for forecasts, but make sure someone's still there to teach you which way the cow's facing.
You know, Simon, I've got this friend Monica, a real tech whiz, who stepped into her family's apple orchard business. There was this one season, she relied solely on high-tech forecasts to plan her harvest. Predictions were all sunshine and sweet breezes, or at least that's what her apps beamed at her. She worked those forecasts like gospel, decked out her crew with schedules tighter than a drum. But as fate has a sense of humor, a freak hailstorm kicked in, and boy, did it dance across that orchard. Her gadgets didn't see that coming. Crops took a hit, apples looking more golf ball size, battered from the skies. Now here's where you feel the weight of what you're saying. Monica's grandpa, this seasoned old-timer with eyes that seemed to converse with nature, had been a bit skeptical about that sunny forecast from the get-go. He felt something was off just by smelling the air, really old-school stuff. The guy even hinted at delaying the harvest a few days. But Monica, confident in her silicon crystal ball, stuck to her printouts. Looking back, she admitted there was a valuable lesson served cold with her side of broken apples. A reminder that while tech brings a lot to the table, respecting the whispers of experience is not just charming, it's essential. After all, sometimes the best forecast comes from looking up from your screen and just listening to the wisdom around you. That incident shaped how she approached farm management, carefully blending the digital forecasts with a dash of intuition. Because when both can sit at the table, well, that's when you bring in the full harvest, both technologically and traditionally.
Talk about a wake-up call wrapped in a hailstorm. Joe, Monica's story gives crunch time a whole new meaning. Just proves that when tech meets tradition, you might just dodge the bullet, or the hail in this case. Frank.
Did you know there's a new smart irrigation system out there that actually listens to the plants? No kidding, it gauges when the crops really need watering. Talk about giving your plants a voice.
Plants yakking about thirst sounds nifty, but don't get carried away. Fancy systems are pricey, and what if they go kaput? There's farmers already scraping by who can't bet the farm on tech that may or may not stand the test of time, or drought.
True, the cost is something to chew on, Simon. You invest in high-tech systems and you're banking a lot on their reliability amidst those droughts or downpours. But consider this. What's pricier in the long run? Investing upfront in systems that could potentially save your crop from disaster or facing a total wipeout because you didn't adapt? Sure, it's a gamble either way, but I'm betting on innovation, like drought-resistant seeds that can thrive with less water. It's not just about survival, it's about planning for resilience in the face of climate extremes that show no signs of playing nice.
Innovation? More like a band-aid on a bullet wound, Joe. Drought-resistant seeds sound fab until you realize we're playing genetic bingo with our food supply. Sure, they might take less water, but what's the trade-off? Flavor? Nutrients? Plus, these gizmos and modified seeds are just temporary fixes to bigger issues, like, hello, climate change. If we don't address the hard stuff, we're just treading water while the ship's sinking. And at some point, there won't be enough high-tech lifeboats to keep us all afloat.
You make a solid point there, Simon. We're so focused on immediate solutions that we might be missing the forest for the trees, or, in agriculture, the farm for the plants. It's a tightrope walk between innovation and preservation. Yes, we need to safeguard our current food supply with tech, but if we're not careful with how we tinker with nature, we could end up with a bigger mess on our hands. The real deal is grappling with climate change holistically. Less carbon, more conservation. Let's pump the brakes before we speed off the cliff, right?
Hitting the nail on the head, Joe. While we're busy souping up our farm tech to beat the weather, we gotta ask, are we just dodging hailstorms instead of fixing the climate that's chucking ice in the first place? We rush for these quick fixes, but let's not kid ourselves. The big picture is as scary as a tornado in the henhouse. The real work? It's about looking past the next harvest and investing in a planet where drought-resistant seeds aren't needed to begin with.
Spot on about the quick fixes, Simon. We're jazzed up about tech solving our weather woes, but if we don't curb the cause, our climate missteps, all the agri-tech advances won't mean squat. True, they help us adapt to today's droughts and torrents, which is no small feat, but we've got to play the long game. That means cutting emissions and embracing sustainable practices that protect the environment, like regenerative agriculture. It's not just about lasting another season. It's about ensuring future generations don't inherit a dust bowl.
Hold your horses, Joe. Sure, cutting emissions is key, but let's not throw all our techie baby carrots out with the bathwater. These agri-tech wonders, if done right, are no small potatoes. Imagine droughts hit, smack in the growing season. You gonna tell a farmer to wait it out on hopes of global policy change? Nah, they've got mouths to feed, bills to pay. Innovations like precision irrigation or hardy seeds give them a fighting chance. This isn't just short-term stuff, it's adapting in real time. Saving farms today might just be what we need to get to that greener tomorrow you're talking about.
All right, let's dive deeper. Saving farms today is crucial, no doubt about it. Precision agriculture isn't just a trend, It represents a shift towards highly efficient farming that uses every drop of water like it's liquid gold. These systems are game changers. They target the root of the problem, quite literally, by minimizing waste and maximizing growth even under extreme weather conditions. We've seen automated drought defenses keep fields green when Mother Nature goes rogue with her rain schedule. Sure, these advancements won't reverse climate change on their own, but they're vital tools in our resilience toolbox. They buy us time and crops, while the bigger environmental battles are fought in global conferences and policy think tanks. Without agritech, we'd be up the creek without a paddle or a working farm to return to.
You're painting a mighty pretty picture, Joe, about these shiny tools in our toolbox. But let's not forget these gadgets depend on something slippery: power and connectivity. What happens when your smart irrigation decides to take an unplanned siesta during a power cut? Or worse, when your internet's down? It's great until it's not. And there you are, standing in your field like a lost sheep, wondering why your crops aren't chatting with the satellites. Sure, agritech's cool when it works, but let's keep one foot on solid ground. We need a plan B that doesn't require rebooting.
Points taken, Simon. Dependence on power and connectivity is indeed the Achilles heel of high-tech farming. It's critical we weave a safety net that works offline too, because nature doesn't wait for us to reboot. Agritech's amazing until it isn't. So the question we need to explore next is this: how do we build robust agricultural systems that benefit from tech without being left high and dry when it fails? There's definitely some fertile ground for discussion there.
Well, Joe, you know what they say. When tech takes a nosedive, it's back to reading the skies and chewing on a bit of that good old folklore. Speaking of which, ever hear about those quaint tales where cornstalks would uproot themselves to play hide and seek from the clouds? Just picture it, a sea of green shimmying across the field whenever a rain cloud looms. Now there's a crop dance worth watching.
Man, that would be something else. Can you imagine looking out your window to a bunch of corn stalks booking it across the field to catch some rays? No need for fancy irrigation systems if your crops just take off towards the nearest sunny spot. It'd be wild. Whole landscapes changing places like some kind of plant-based musical chairs whenever the weather shifts. It's nature meets comedy.
Yeah, it'd be a real hoot until your sunflowers decide to sprint for the neighbor's field because he gets more sun. And what about veggie traffic jams? Imagine a pileup of pumpkins and potatoes every time there's a drizzle. The chaos. Plus, think of the legal kerfuffle when Farmer Bob sues you because your carrots made a break for his organic patch. We'd need crop cops to manage plant patrols.
Oh man, the thought of veggie traffic cops is cracking me up. But you're right. I can totally picture the chaos. Pumpkins bumper to bumper, carrots causing a ruckus, and poor Farmer Bob dealing with those rogue carrots. It'd sure make our current farming problems seem like a walk in the park. Good fences make good neighbors, but what do you do when the crops themselves go wandering off? Maybe we'd need GPS collars for cabbages or something.
Oh, totally. Poor Farmer Bob and his runaway carrot situation. It's heartwarming, but also such a mess. I mean, it'd be kind of endearing seeing little GPS collars on cabbages trudging back at dusk. Makes you think about how sometimes you just can't control everything, no matter how much fencing or tech you've got. Those little green guys would have minds of their own, a bit like us, eh? Always wandering off topic or chasing the next sunny spot in our conversations.
Absolutely. We're just a couple of sun-chasing folks in a podcast field. But hey, speaking of wayward plants, I'm reminded of that joke. Why did the tomato turn red? Because it saw the salad dressing and tried to leaf the garden. Seriously though, if our crops had legs, we'd have veggie marathons instead of harvests. It'd be a whole new kind of farm fitness program. Flee your way to a healthier crop.
Ha! Tomato blushing, classic. Veggie marathons, huh? I'd pay good money to see a head of lettuce take on a marathon. Flee your way to a healthier crop. Slap that on a t-shirt, and it's a bestseller, Joe.
Right? And I can just see it now. Farmers markets turning into a spectator sport, cheering on your favorite veggies as they leg it towards the finish line. And in the lead, it's the lightning-fast zucchini with the carrots close behind. Wait, oh no, the spinach took a detour at the herb stand. It'd put farm fresh in a whole new light. These veggies aren't just fresh, they're sprinting to your plate.
Oh, come on, Joe. Calling that a market is generous. It'd be pandemonium. Picture this. It's the final stretch. Tomatoes rolling down to victory, but boom, a gust of wind and they're all over the place. You'd have more red on the ground than at a ketchup festival. And I haven't even started on the veggie betting rings. I bet $20 on Broccoli Bob. He looks fit after dodging that fryer last week. Forget farm to table. This is more like farm to fiasco.
Oh, the sheer veggie chaos, Simon. The betting would be just as unpredictable as the weather. And on that note, I reckon there are more wild weather tales where this came from, each one waiting to sprout into another rambunctious garden of giggles. Who knows what other atmospheric antics we'll dig up next from our farmer's almanac of whimsical weather anecdotes.
Absolutely, Joe. And while we're getting giggles out of chaos, it's a hop, skip, and a jump to talking about the real-world chaos brewing with climate change. It's affecting our crops big time, and folks are talking serious about geoengineering our way out of this mess. Sounds like sci-fi, right? But there's genuine chatter about tweaking weather patterns to ensure food security. How far should we toy with Mother Nature before she decides we're grounded? That's the big ethical thundercloud we're staring at now.
Geoengineering to tackle crop issues? That's opening a can of worms, if you ask me. Sure, food security is critical, but messing with weather patterns seems like we're signing up for a VIP pass on the unpredictable outcomes train. Who's to say we won't trigger some butterfly effect, right? It's not like we've got a planet B waiting in the wings. The ethical dilemma is as thick as pea soup. Do we really want to play dice with the climate like that?
So, Joe, you're saying we might be opening Pandora's box with this whole geoengineering gig. What if we end up with even bigger problems than the fix was worth? How do we draw the line between innovating for survival and potentially crafting our own environmental downfall?
Exactly. We've got to know our limits. Quick fixes can lead to long-term headaches. It's not just about tweaking a few clouds and calling it a day. We're talking about complex systems that have taken millennia to evolve. Letting humans with their finger on the weather switch could spell trouble. We mess up our smartphones all the time. Do we really want to risk that with the planet's thermostat? Where's the line between being nature's stewards and its saboteurs?
Joe, you're nailing it. Taking control of the weather? We've got trouble updating our phones without causing a digital meltdown. The whole idea is about as stable as a house of cards in a tornado. It's like we're saying, hey, Mother Nature, scoot over, humans are driving now. But the truth is, we don't even have a learner's permit for this stuff. The potential for disaster is through the roof. Do we really want to take that bet?
Oh, I'm with you. It's hubris to think we can just muscle in and take the wheel from Mother Nature. Sure, geoengineering might look like a safety net for our food supplies, but we're amateurs in the game of climate. It's full of complexities that no computer model can fully predict. What happens when we hit an ethical snag we didn't foresee? We need to weigh the risks versus rewards. Gambling with the environment could leave us paying a debt we can never settle.
Hey, new listeners, Simon here with Joe, diving into the ethical thunderstorm surrounding geoengineering. We're chatting about whether science should step in and tweak the weather to protect our crops from climate change. But it's not as easy as flipping a switch. There's a real worry we might cause more harm than good, like playing Jenga with Earth's climate. It's a hot potato for sure. Can we really outsmart Mother Nature without getting burned? Stay tuned as we chew over this crunchy conundrum.
Sure, geoengineering sounds risky, but let's flip the coin for a second. Imagine doing nothing, watching as unpredictable weather wipes out crops year after year. Famine, economic collapse, it's an apocalyptic buffet. So here's that other viewpoint. If technology can give us a fighting chance to stabilize our climate and feed billions, isn't it worth considering? It's not about playing God. It's about being responsible stewards with the tools at our disposal. The risks are real, but so is the threat of inaction.
You've got a point on facing that doomsday scenario, Joe. Just sitting around isn't exactly a stellar plan. But think about this. Every time humanity comes up with a master tool, there's a chance we turn Earth into an even wonkier workshop. Are we responsible enough not to hammer our thumbs? Sure, the threat of inaction looms large. It's like that saying about jumping from the frying pan into the fire. We gotta make sure our tech-savvy rescue mission isn't just us leaping into the flames.
I hear you on the human error angle. History isn't exactly reassuring us there. Yet, we're damn good at innovating our way out of tight spots. Are we just going to ignore that drive? If we set up the right safeguards, run simulations, and start small, maybe we've got a shot at not just dodging the bullet, but also redirecting it. We're always playing with fire, but perhaps this time we can cook up a solution instead of getting scorched. The stakes are as high as they get. So is it about being cautious or being courageous in the face of climate calamity?
Joe, I get what you're saying. Humans can be pretty brilliant when our backs are against the wall. And yeah, if we're real careful, maybe there's a sliver of hope. Simulations in small steps sound nice, but let's remember, even with precautions, Mother Nature has a knack for throwing curveballs that no simulation can predict. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. If we miss something, it could get messy. It's a gamble either way. We're talking about either daring to dial back disaster or potentially feeding into a future fiasco.
Sure, one could argue that geoengineering is about human arrogance, but consider this. If we have a shot at preventing widespread hunger or curbing natural disasters, isn't it almost a moral obligation to take it? Think of it as applied wisdom rather than hubris. We've sent people to the moon, for crying out loud. And here's why that opposing view holds water. Every tool we've ever created, from the wheel to the smartphone, has been about overcoming nature's hurdles. Geoengineering could just be the next step in that legacy, using our understanding of science to preserve and protect what we hold dear. Is it really so different from building dams or irrigation systems? It's about scale, sure, but also about intent, aiming not to conquer nature, but to coexist with it more harmoniously as its challenges grow harsher.
You know, Joe, it all boils down to this tricky balancing act between necessity and humility. Yes, we've done the moonwalk, but this planet's climate is a much more complicated dance floor. Using science to dodge disasters is tempting. It's like humanity's ultimate hackathon. But every tool from history was a newfangled novelty once upon a time, and look where that got us. With geoengineering, we're straddling a razor-thin line between savior and screw-up. It's definitely worth chewing over. How far are we willing to go to protect our home without possibly losing it in the process?
Speaking of protecting our home, it's not just about the grand schemes. There are threads that weave survival into daily life. Take fashion, for instance. It's not all glitz and glamour. Now we're seeing a shift towards climate resilience in what we wear, clothes designed to adapt to extreme weather. Wild, huh? It's like wrapping yourself in survival gear. But here's the twist. As we don smarter fabrics, are we unconsciously weaving respect for Mother Nature into our wardrobe? It's an evolution from Vanity Fair to survival gear with a conscience. What's your take on turning the runway into a lifeline?
Runway to lifeline, huh? But let's get real for a second, Joe. Fashion's often about as environmentally conscious as a gas-guzzling monster truck. Sure, we've got fancy weatherproof threads now, but what's the cost? The planet gets a new dress code at the expense of, well, the planet. Kinda ironic, don't you think? I mean, how many polar bears are rocking climate-adaptive parkas? We're creating high-tech gear to survive the storms that maybe, just maybe, we had a hand in brewing. Doesn't it make you wonder if we're just patching holes in a sinking ship rather than keeping it afloat?
You've hit the nail on the head, Simon. There's no denying the bitter irony here. We're crafting these sophisticated materials while possibly exacerbating the problem. It's a gut punch, really. Every step forward in weather-resistant tech seems to drag us half a step back environmentally. Yet it's this mad seesaw we're on, equipping ourselves to face harsher climates without necessarily turning down the heat on global warming. It's tough to swallow, like we're sewing with one hand and tearing apart with the other. We have to ask, can we get serious about sustainability, or are we just dressing up a deeper issue?
Man, Joe, it's a real head-scratcher. Definitely feels like we're stuck between a rock and a hard place, doesn't it? You're all cozied up in your storm-defying jacket, feeling like the king of the world, when bam, it hits you that this same tech-savvy garment might be feeding the fury of future storms. It's heart-wrenching. There's this gnawing question eating at me. Are we just getting better at coping rather than fixing the root of the problem? We gotta ask ourselves, what's behind our choices? A quick fix to keep us comfy, or a genuine step toward healing our home? It's quite the emotional tangle to unravel.
Absolutely, Simon. It's enough to keep you up at night. We pride ourselves on quick fixes and comforts, but at what cost? It's a real blow, standing there in the storm, protected by the latest gear, yet knowing you're part of the cycle fueling future tempests. We're aiming to rise above nature's challenges, but not necessarily in the right way. It's this deep-seated dilemma, our survival instincts versus our ability to be truly sustainable. Our hearts are in it, trying to make things better, but it's like we're caught in a downpour of good intentions and inconvenient truths.
Ah, Joe, the classic battle of survival instincts versus sustainability. It's like a seasonal fashion trend that never quite fits right. Everyone loves the idea of high-tech, climate-proof clothes until they see the price tag, not just in dollars, but in damage to our environment. Don't get me wrong, the innovation is as slick as a raincoat in a monsoon, but what are we really strutting down this runway towards? Yes, our gear might survive the apocalypse, but if Earth's at a tipping point, maybe it's time we shift our focus from dressing for disaster to actually dialing back the disasters themselves. It's not just about weathering the storm, it's about rethinking the whole fashion forecast.
No doubt, the road from high fashion to high function is paved with good intentions and flashy innovations. But at the heart of it, we've got to reckon with that final price tag on Earth's tab. It's a colossal catwalk where each step in our weather-beating boots leaves an imprint on nature, on culture, on survival itself. So let's ponder this. In looking sharp against the elements, could we perhaps tailor a future where fashion and nature aren't just trends, but partners? What kind of blueprint are we really crafting for generations that follow? The conversation's far from over, Simon.
Speaking of tailoring a future, Joe, it's not just about fabric innovation. Our threads have stories stitched into them, stretching back through history. Like trench coats, started out in the military, right? Now they're practically a badge of cool in every detective flick. Just think how many times you've seen the classic gumshoe splashed across the screen in that iconic rain gear. Drizzling with style, I mean literally. But isn't it wild to see how rainproof fashion has evolved? It's gone from battlefield necessity to big screen glory, and even today's tech wear is getting time in the spotlight. How about those waterproof jackets in spy thrillers, huh? Makes dealing with a downpour feel like you're about to save the world.
It sure does, Simon. The trench coat's journey from the trenches to high fashion is a tale wrapped in many layers. It's fascinating to track these transformations, not just in clothes, but also in our collective imagination. But all right, folks, that's a wrap on today's mind-soaking adventure through the world of weatherproof wearables. A huge thank you to every single listener tuning in. You're the real MVPs here. Remember, we do this dance every day. So, keep your calendars marked and come back for more at 5 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. You won't want to miss it. Stay dry, stay stylish, and as always, keep tuning into Infinite Podcast. Catch you on the next wave.